In this video, I'm going to walk you through a strawberry milkshake IPA I recently brewed on my electric Herms home brewery. I'm going to go over the recipe, and I'll walk you through the entire process on this electric system. I'll also briefly highlight a few new pieces of equipment I used during this brew day, including an SS Brewtech mash recirculating manifold, a DIY dry hopper, and my new closed transfer system I put together. I plan on creating separate videos for these items in the near future. Make sure to hit that like button if you find this information useful, and subscribe if you want to be notified on future videos on this channel. It's been a while since I brewed on this system, and I was a little rusty throughout the entire brewing process. Although I planned this recipe, I messed up on a few ingredients, I missed a few target temperatures, I added too much water during mash-in, and I forgot to relocate the temperature sensor on the heat exchanger while recirculating the mash, causing higher temperatures than I was shooting for. That being said, I hit my original gravity, but more on these mistakes later in the video. Now for the Strawberry Milkshake IPA Brewday. I've never brewed this style of beer before, so it was a little bit of a learning experience for me. This recipe challenged me to focus on things like pH levels, fruit additions, and trying new types of hops that complemented a milkshake flavor. And it was fun trying to pair hops with a milkshake style of beer. If you have any thoughts on this brew day, I would love to hear about them down in the comments. For this recipe, it started off as an American IPA from a fellow brew tuber. I'll post a link to the original recipe in the description if you want to brew a fantastic American IPA. Here's a quick rundown of the recipe for this 5-gallon batch of beer. There's 10 pounds of Pale Malt 2-row, 2 pounds of Flaked Oats, 1 pound of Vienna Malt, a half a pound of Munich Malt, 1 pound of Lactose, 3.5 pounds of strawberry extract, 2 vanilla beans, 0.65 ounces of Sabro hops for the boil, 0.35 ounces of Sabro hops in the Whirlpool, 1 ounce of Azzacca hops for the Whirlpool, 1 ounce of Mosaic for the dry hop, and 2 packs of London Ale 3 for the yeast. I used RO water and salts to adjust the water profile to enhance this style of hazy IPA. If you're not into adjusting water profiles, you could use spring water or any water that doesn't use chlorine and you'll be just fine. I started this brew day by bringing my mash and sparge water up to temperature. My Herms system uses electrical elements and pumps to heat and maintain target temperatures, but you could use any burner or even a stove if you're really careful at hitting target temperatures. If you follow my channel, you'll notice I replaced the colander in my mash tun with this SS Brewtech manifold. I plan on making a video that talks about this upgrade in the near future and how well it performs during this brew day. 2 quick reasons why I upgraded to this manifold include: 1, I wanted to be able to completely shut the lid during mash, and 2, I wanted a device that sits on top of the grain bed that disturbed the grains a little bit less while I recirculated during mash. Once the water was at temperature, my buddy Matt helped me mash in. Since I was a little out of practice with this system, I accidentally added my full boil volume while mashing in. Instead of trying to fix the mash water volume, I decided to leave it alone and recirculate the mash through my heat exchanger at the full water volume. This wasn't a fair trial run for my new manifold, but it seemed to work just fine. I also planned on adding my salt additions first during mash and then during sparge, but since I was at the full water volume, I added all my salt additions at the start of the mash. After the mash was complete, I configured my pump and silicone tubes to fill my boil kettle with the wort. I started to ramp up the temperature in the kettle to a boil. At the same time, I configured my pump for the Whirlpool stage. This is just a technique that pumps the wort around the side of the kettle, creating a swirling motion in the kettle. I'll also use a counterflow chiller to lower the temperature of the wort to 170 degrees for my hop Whirlpool additions, and also knock the temperature down to pitching temperatures. While my wort was coming up to a boil, I started to measure out my hop additions that will go in at the 30-minute mark. I decided to try a hop called Sabro for the bittering hop. The character of this hop included stone fruit, coconut, and tropical fruit, and I was shooting for 24 IBUs. After my wort came to a boil, I added the hops at 30 minutes, boiled for another 30 minutes, and started to knock down the temperature by recirculating the wort through my counterflow chiller. Once I hit 170 degrees, I added my Whirlpool additions for 20 minutes. I added another 0.35 ounces of Sabro and then 1 ounce of a hop called Azzacca. Azzacca is just another hop that has tropical fruit and berry characteristics. After the Whirlpool was done, I recirculated the wort through the counterflow chiller and knocked it down to pitching temperatures. After about 15 minutes, I hit 70 degrees and transferred the wort to my fermenters and set the fermentation temperature on my glycol system. If you haven't seen my latest DIY glycol system video, make sure to check it out. I go through some maintenance on the system and a few upgrades that were really helpful. After I set up my fermenter with a temperature sensor and the heat exchanger, I pitched 2 packets of London Ale 3. The yeast was a little old, and the directions recommended using 2 packs of yeast if the original gravity was over 1070. It took a few days for the fermenters to start fermenting, but once it started, I had a very active fermentation. After about 7 days, I added my hops using this new dry hopper. This is another addition to my brewery that will help me adding dry hops to my fermenters while minimizing the introduction of oxygen into the fermenter. I've never really had an issue dry hopping since dry hopping is typically done while CO2 is being pushed out of the fermenter, but I'm willing to try an inexpensive version of a dry hopper to see if it makes my beer any better. I plan on making a video of this DIY dry hopper in the near future. Dry hopping was straightforward. I filled my new dry hopper with the hops, screwed on the lid, and placed it on top of my fermenter and pressurized the fermenter with CO2 while holding it in place. I used a pressure relief valve at the top to purge as much oxygen as I could. My dry hopper uses a 1.5-inch valve to drop the hops and hold pressure. My first attempt was a little awkward, but it was successful. More to come on this build in a future video. I need to use it a few more times to see how useful it is. After a few more days, I checked the original gravity. My plan was to add the strawberry and vanilla beans at the end of the fermentation, but I ended up adding these ingredients at 1050. I just ran with it, but I expect a higher ABV due to the puree additions during fermentation. Another recent upgrade to my brewery included the CO2 port on my fermenter's lid. Now I'm able to purge my fermenter after hop additions with this mini CO2 gauge or my larger CO2 tank. I also plan on using this port for pressure transfers. After 2 weeks, I checked my gravity again, and I hit my final gravity of 1020 for real this time. I then ramped up my fermenters to 72 degrees for my diacetyl rest. After the diacetyl rest, I set my glycol chiller to 45 degrees and cold crash for 2 days. After cold crashing, I transferred the beer from my fermenter to my keg using this DIY closed transfer system. I received a lot of questions why I don't transfer my beer from my fermenter to my keg under pressure, so this is for you guys. I finally pieced together a pressurized transfer system. This is how my transfer system works. I attach my CO2 tank fitting on the fermenter's CO2 port and swap out the temperature sensor and blow-off valve with a stopper that holds pressure in the fermenter. I then attach my pressure transfer fitting tube from the fermenter's valve to the out port of the keg. I then attach a spunning valve on the keg's in port to set the pressure of the keg. I initially set the keg's pressure to 2 psi. I then turned on the pressure from the CO2 tank in order to pressurize the fermenter to force the beer into the keg. I had to play around with the pressure between the keg and the fermenter to push the beer through. It was trial and error at first, but I found I had to have less pressure in the keg than the fermenter to force the beer into the keg. I released the spunning valve a few times in order to reduce the keg's pressure. I found I only needed about 1 psi to push the beer through the lines. I was able to monitor the level of the keg by the condensation marks on the outside. Overall, this process was very easy to do. I'll create a video that goes over the components and build in more detail. After I was done transferring the beer under pressure, I started to force carbonate the keg, placed it into my keezer and attached my keg to the gas manifold and beer tap. Make sure to check out my keezer update to find out how I upgraded lines to duo-type fittings and other improvements to this system. The duo-type fittings were well worth it. I'll post a follow-up video for the taste test. I'm not sure what to expect. I missed my water volumes for the mash. I missed a few target temperatures. I added ingredients outside the window of what I was shooting for, but we'll see. It could be great. I might have to throw it away. If you've made it this far and you haven't done it already, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to be notified on future videos. See you next time. Cheers.